That's Art Deco from his new album, Serene Demon. We found Art at home in Victoria, British Columbia, but it turns out the story of Serene Demon began with a trip to New York City. Watch and listen as Art explains.
But I had yet to go on a trip for myself, and I was newly single at the time, so I was like, I'm gonna go and rent an apartment in the Lower East Side and just like write and listen to jazzy movie soundtracks and film noir and put on a trench coat and walk the mean streets of Manhattan like it's 1977 all over again. Of course, Manhattan is not like 1977 or even
No.
2001. Everybody fetishizes and romanticizes specific periods, but if you actually talk to anyone who was living in like 70s New York, it was not a very luxurious or
It was about to go
place to be.
out of business. There was rubbish everywhere, but there was also music everywhere. The whole punk thing was happening, and lots of other things as well.
Disco, punk, and yeah, there's this book by Tom DeGia called New York, New York, New York, and I was reading that, sort of diving into that history. It starts in 1977 New York, and it almost gives this like diarized year by year breakdown of New York all the way till I believe 2011.
Huh?
And a lot of violence, a lot of dog shit in the streets. Did you know about that? This kind of blew my mind. There was no bylaw in New York City prohibiting dog owners from just leaving dog shit on the sidewalk. So you would be walking down the street and there would be just landmines everywhere. And now when you see like a big steaming turd in a downtown street, like you shame that dog owner.
Absolutely.
You pick up after your dog, right? And just kind of like apparently it was very controversial when they passed a bylaw stating that it was going to now cost you a fine if you didn't pick up after your dog. People said this is not humanitarian, this is against my rights, this is disgusting, but it's so funny how different that era is. But I definitely romanticize, there's a certain thing about that period with the movie and with the art and the music that I tried to like breathe my creativity to. So I had to go to the source. I had to live it up in New York, albeit for a short amount of time, see what could come of it.
And what did you think? How did it affect you? Did it live up to your expectations?
Yeah. I mean, what I found was I'm a lot more gregarious and outgoing in a different city than I am in my own.
Oh,
It's
okay.
almost like you can adopt like a disguise, like a fake nose and a mustache, and like put on the glasses and like just the thing about New York and bigger cities in general, like no matter how recognized you are in your tiny little community, there's always going to be someone way bigger, way more famous, way more successful. New York does not give a flying fuck about so I, not that I'm anything, and even in my small town of Victoria, but I was like really, there was like this blissful Zen state that I could kind of create in, knowing that no matter where I go in this town, no one knows who the fuck I am, nor do they care. And I could truly be anonymous and people watch. And I found great pleasure in going to, speakeasies and bars. And normally where I'd be very quite mousy and reserved, I was making conversations, and I really was doing as much of a character study as if I was a playwright or a script writer as I was, scoring the soundtrack to this movie that I was writing in my head.
Yeah. Plus, it's notorious for a place where people can come from outside of New York, come to New York and reinvent themselves, turn them into who they want to be rather than who they were. Bob Dylan, a perfect example of that, and there's tons more. So
I saw the movie.
yeah, there you go. What'd you think of it?
I loved it, actually. I went with my parents, and they're born in the early 50s. Yeah, my dad has fond memories of mowing the lawn as a 10-year-old kid in North Vancouver, listening to a transistor radio and hearing Subterranean, Homesick Blues or whatever, however old he was.
Yeah.
But and so it was fun to kind of go with that generation. It'd be like taking them to see like a Kurt Cobain documentary, or,
Yeah.
probably, or a movie, a biopic on Kurt Cobain, also starring Timothy Chalamet as Kurt Cobain.
It could happen. You never know.
So yeah, it was cool to experience it in a theater full of baby boomers.
Yep, yep,
I
yeah.
loved it.
Well, I'm a baby boomer myself, and I enjoyed it immensely. So I love the fact that it was about the songs almost more than Dylan himself, because he remained kind of an enigma as he does to this day. But he was like a vessel. He just didn't know what was happening to him. These songs were coming out of him left, right, and center. So
Yeah, and any time that like art is reinvented or an original voice sort of pokes through the discourse and the noise and becomes this new signal to like collect like rally the collective consciousness of like the youth that
yeah,
becomes like the quote unquote the voice of a generation. Like
yes,
it's exciting to kind of to see that sort of organically happen, and you can't create that in a laboratory.
yeah.
you know we saw it with recently, I would say, with like in the mainstream with like an artist like Billie Eilish or Chaperone.
Hmm.
They become sort of the, like you said, this vessel. They channel like an original sound,
Yeah,
and the kids go bunkers.
they do indeed. Or even Taylor Swift. She,
Yeah, I mean that's like a yeah, that's a different. Yeah, I forgot about Taylor Swift. I don't know. She's had some staying power for quite a long time though too,
she
right?
has,
It's
yes.
almost like she's like the almost like a legacy act, in the cruise ship version of pop stardom. Not no disrespect to Tay Tay, but like what I mean was, when someone comes out of nowhere
Yeah,
and is like,
yeah.
I remember hearing was it Bad Guy by Billie Eilish? And it's like, what is this song?
Mm.
This is such a bizarre piece of music, and then it blowing up in a mainstream kind of way. Like that's kind of really exciting. That's like, the last thing, like for my generation, I remember being a really young kid, and like that would have been like grunge, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, now we've covered Bowie, Dylan, and Tay-Tay. Let's talk about you for and this record. So you went to New York. Did you write a bunch of songs after that inspired were the inspiration for the trip? How did it happen from there?
Well, I mean, it was sort of I call it like it was like the primordial soup from which a lot of these songs sort of spawned from, but it took a lot of work. So that was the fall of 2022. And then in early 2023, I linked up with Rhythm Section in Vancouver, my longtime Rhythm Section that have played on a few albums now. Malcolm, shout out Malcolm and Pascal. I call them the West Coast Boogie Machine.
Right?
And I would take the ferry over and I would say, here are my demos. And instead of them just learning them verbatim like they had on the last few albums, they really wanted to kind of get involved and kind of punch the jokes up, if you will.
Gotcha.
And so we spent a lot of time, like January, February, March, April, 4 months really, you know, chipping away. We'd record all of the sessions. I'd go back home on the ferry. I'd spend all week sort of tinkering and trying ideas. And then I'd bring that iteration in. So it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of chipping away, a lot of punching stuff up. And I mean, they have writing credit on 3 songs as a result, because I
Yeah.
mean, they came from jams. Like once the sort of the once the dam breaks and that creative river is like just gushing with energy, it's like you said earlier, it's like you're just this conduit. It's channeling through you.
Hmm.
And I found that the songs were starting to just get tighter and better, and the creativity was flowing. And then at a certain point, a producer kind of approached us, approached me, and then we kind of folded him into the picture, and then it didn't work out, so we parted ways after a couple weeks in the studio. And I took the record back into my purview throughout the summer, doing sessions with at different studios. I mean, there was a lot of moving parts and pieces, and the original vision in that New York Lower East Side apartment was, I wanted to make a very cinematic art rock record with elements of disco and jazz, and sure, little glammy elements, but I was honestly trying to steer clear of anything that could be misconstrued or interpreted as glam rock or 80s. And sure enough, That's all it gets compared to when it gets reviewed by people.
There
You
you
can't
go.
win, Marty.
I know you can't win. What are you going to do? Well, I definitely hear the 70s in it, but maybe it's an age thing. People hear what they know, and I grew up in, I'm an older guy, so that's my touchstone there. So I hear all that, and the Bee Gees is in there, but it's like you say, you should be dancing or something. Instead, it's not later stuff, and there's not the synthy things that and the drum machines and all that I personally can't stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's people will all, I mean, you put on a wig and some makeup in 10 years ago and you're still considered glam. I don't understand what the glam, um, it's just like glam rocker, Art Deco releases new album. It's like, motherfucker, there's like a vestige of glam. If glam is horns and acoustic guitars and fuzz guitars in an arrangement and strings, sure, this has elements of glam, but
Sure.
so does Motown, so does
Yeah, yeah,
pop music from,
yeah.
and like I've spent more time out of a glam rock aesthetic and costume than I have in. I've
Right.
released more music now out of that appearance. Um, it's very bizarre. I mean, maybe in 10 more albums, I'll finally shed that
Yeah. And
moniker that I
Pascal's a
don't.
very funky bass player, and that's very unglam kind of. So, and that kind of anchors the whole record, especially like Tree of Life, I think is one of those songs that you said started with a jam and they get some co-writing credit on that. So, uh, how did that come together?
And I mean, at the outset, I said, look, we'll make a trade. If you let me write like 8, 9, 10 songs, let me like hammer home what I'm trying to, what the vocabulary, what the mission statement is sonically of this album, because I want everything to be congruent with one another, especially if we're going to collaborate on something. And obviously, they've played with me long enough. They know my musical vocabulary, what I like, what I don't like. But again, I was like, I want you to throw the rule book out.
Hmm.
Let's start anew. And so we'd be in this jam space with the microphones set up as if it was like kind of a mini studio situation. I was up in the loft with headphones on, and I would speak into the microphone, at the beginning of every session. I'd say, okay, let's just do something loose and fun. Let me play some stuff in your cans. One of the songs I played with respect to Tree of Life was, You Should Be Dancing, the Bee Gees. And I said, listen how, break it down, like what's going on here. Well, the groove is all in like a box. It's like, I don't know if it's G, let's say it's the key of G. It's like, how many different ways can you play a riff on G and not move away? And the only time you move away is to do something chromatic where you're like falling down the stairs or climbing up the stairs. And I'm like, let's use that as our sort of like, mental tramp stamp, if you will. And I pressed play, plus record rather, and the first thing that came out of their fingers and their heart and their soul was the different riffs in Tree of Life. And then
Right.
I would just shout, okay, go to chromaticism, okay, do that, do that. And they would just kind of, it was like a pure collaboration. I was calling shots and they're doing some funky shit. And there was about 2 minutes of just jamming, and I bring that home and I made like song Sudoku out of it.
Right.
How, snakes and ladders, maybe if I move this here. And if you look at the sort of the sequencing of that song, it's all chopped up from a handful of riffs. And it's funny because like there's like a few kind of curveballs in that song, with respect to where like a bridge ought to be and where a chorus lands and where the outro comes into play. Like it all happened from its cut up method. It's like William Burroughs cut up, but with riffs.
Right.
And that was proved successful. And then Shell Shock was another one, but that was a riff that they'd worked on together. And I said, well, I like this, I don't like this. And then we kind of collaborated and cut it up on the fly. And then the last one would be A Change of Scenery, the album closer. That was the song that changed the most from my demo to final product. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it
It
was fun. It
sounds
was a
like.
very very enriching endeavor, I guess.
And
Great
speaking of a lot
adventure.
of work, my understanding is that the title track, Serene Demon, took you like 2 months to write. And there's been a bit written about the fact that that is the fact. But listening to the finished track, it's almost an album within an album. There's a lot going on in that. And cinematic was a word you used and a word I wrote down when I was listening to it. So, I mean, you got to be pretty happy with the result.
If you're looking for meaning in this life, are you even living or just passing the time? It's been like this for years, so don't give me the cold tears.
I don't know why the 2 months thing people make that it's like sometimes a song takes 2 minutes, you know?
Right,
Sometimes
right,
it takes
right.
2 years. Sometimes the song's never finished.
Yeah.
I think the 2 months was just more like I would wake up at the crack of dawn and I would go to the piano and I wouldn't stop work. Sometimes I'd forget to eat. It'd be 5, 6 p.m. I'd be like, fuck, I need to get up and move around. It was this monomaniacal behavior, this obsession to crack the code on that song and had all these pieces and that piano playing and some of those jazz chords that was all learned so I'd have the capacity to write it. So it was like a 2 month, it was like a project, like a school project. And then the
Uh-huh.
final exam is like, okay, now it's the audience gets to hear it.
Yep.
So it's funny that people get hung up on the two months. I'm sure musicians are gonna eye roll when they hear that. Like, I think the ideas come quickly. It's channeling them and making sense of them and really refining them that takes the work.
Right.
But that one, the demo to the final product are nearly identical. The strings and the horns and all the little like tidbits in there. It's pretty. I think it was like a labor of TLC. I was determined to write something that was, you know, a lot like the '70s AM rock radio balladeering.
Sure.
Think of like Eric Carmen playing "All by Myself" on the Burt Sugarman's Midnight
Midnight
Special.
Special, sure.
I mean, if you're young and you're watching this and you don't know what the Midnight Special is, it's an incredible live TV series that played, I guess on syndication. It was on cable TV, maybe in the
Yeah,
United
it was
States. I don't
on
know.
late night on the weekends. It was great. I watched it every. It was Midnight Special and the thing with Wolfman Jack. The other,
Hmm.
I forget
And
the name.
Wolfman Jack, I think there's some crossover. He may have hosted some episodes, but it was like a live. It's pre-MTV.
Yeah.
It was a
Oh yeah.
live concert, multiple bands playing everything. There's no backing tracks. Although later on, I think there were some bands that actually lip synced. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
there was some controversy there. Maybe it was a oh my God, what's the band? Boys Are Back in Town. Thin Lizzy
Thin
might have
Lizzy.
done,
Yep.
yeah, might have done one that was canned. Anyways, you watch this episode of Eric Carmen and he's playing and he interpolates Rachmaninoff, I think, for two
Yeah.
minutes, goes off on this crazy solo, and then kicks back into the song. And I think that was like a real aha moment. I'm like, huh, interesting, because I grew up playing classical music and I just yeah, I love that performance. It's flawless. And then there's, Harry Nilsson with
Without
Without
you.
You, which I
Yeah.
believe is a Badfinger cover, but that version is the most, famous one probably. And then yeah,
That and
there's like
Mariah
that
Carey, of course.
yeah, of course. And then there's that triptych on Diamond Dog's Candidate, Sweet Thing Candidate, where it's
Yeah.
this amorphous sort of free time flowing, almost feels like it's soundtracking something.
Yeah.
And it's not like metronomic verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It's like this living, breathing organism. It speeds up and gets louder and slows down and gets small and quiet, and it's dramatic. And so it's just like, yeah, that was the sort of the load star for me. And I was like, I need to write one of those songs before I die.
Now I want to go back and listen to all those songs you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, Don Kirshner's rock concert was another big show back then. Uh, as a teenager in the '70s, you lived for the weekend and staying up late. Your parents were in bed, and you were up until midnight watching all these old, the Midnight Special and rock concert. It was great.
That's cool.
Anyway, now speaking of cinematic, you've made some videos, and one for the title track, which goes, it's a 7 minute long song. So, how involved do you get about, and how concerned do you get about creating this visualization of your music?
I mean, a lot of collaboration, a lot of production, pre-production. I had the idea for that Serene Demon music video. There is a YouTuber named Watching the Aerial. I've shouted this person out quite a bit.
Okay,
I'll continue to shout. I'll
please
continue to shout them out
shout
because it was a
away.
very. So it's a documentary done by this person on YouTube. I believe it's called Collateral and the Death of Neon. And so basically what it is, I think it's like a 20-minute documentary. But it, because the album Serene Demon was very much, planting its flag in film noir, and I was maybe trying to research like some film noir elements that I could sprinkle into the visual assets to accompany the album, the photo shoots, everything like that. I
Yep.
stumbled upon this documentary, and basically it's collateral, as in it references the Michael Mann movie Collateral, which was shot, I think, in the early 2000s, maybe 2004, starring Tom Cruise. He plays an assassin, and it's got a very controversial look at the time because it was early digital
Right.
HD cameras.
Yep.
And Michael Mann famously says, I wouldn't have been able to get the depth of field on these night shots had it not been for the digital technology. I would have had this crazy f-stop. It would have been really grainy. It would have
Yep.
been
Yep.
really, really hard to shoot that depth of field where you have these sweeping helicopter shots of LA.
Yeah.
And then, of course, later, 10 years later, or not even, you've got a movie like Drive, which, iconic shots of LA at night. And so in this documentary, they go deep into the history of night shoots in America, and what this documentary sort of uncovers or teaches you about is how, and this is some nerdy stuff,
Bring it
the
on.
lighting in America, the lighting grid, the street lighting grid has changed dramatically since the 1960s, 1950s.
All right.
And when Hollywood the technology to shoot on film and shoot at night became a little bit more refined and a little bit more advanced, you start to feature, instead of being on a movie set at night, you actually go out on locations at night. And so if you watch movies in the 70s and you see street lighting, you'll notice that there's like a bluish kind of cold hue to the street lamps. I'm thinking Michael Mann's Thief is referenced. I think Taxi Driver, I think
Yeah.
the first Terminator.
Right.
And the reason for that is because these street lamps were using mercury vapor lamps. And America had mercury vapor lamps all over the streeting grid in America, and it was very expensive. And then at one point they switched to sodium vapor lamps. Sodium vapor lamps give off a yellow hue. So if you look at movies in the 90s shot at night, everything's yellow, sepia tone. And then in the early 2000s, right around right around that Michael Mann movie we were talking about, Collateral,
Yeah.
they switched to LEDs.
Right.
So and now, of course, that's all they use. So
Yep.
the street lighting in America has played a sort of a set deck character in the history and the evolution of film noir, neo noir, and so it sets a vibe and just this sort of subconscious feeling when you watch these old movies. And I sent that to some videographer and DOP friends of mine, and we started talking. I was like, well, I'd love to do a music video for Serene Demon whereby I'm seen walking at night, and we do these long telephoto zoom lenses, and I really want to show the streets as a character, much like Taxi Driver and Thief and Drive and all those movies that I mentioned from this documentary. And and so we planned for about a month. We didn't have permits. We shot some crazy guerrilla style shooting. I mean, I would have there's one scene where I'm walking down on a yellow line and I'm smoking a cigarette, and it's probably about 500 feet away. They're up in like a parking garage with a giant like National Geographic style telephoto lens. And
Yeah.
I've got my my iPhone in my breast pocket here of my suit, and it's on speaker, and we're using it as walkie talkies. Okay, Art, keep walking, car coming, peel. And, I have to look, and I'd like peel, like it was that kind of stuff. You know, there's one part in the video where I'm covered in blood and I'm
Yeah.
walking in a sea of people, like that compressed shot where, you know, the camera is 200 feet away and we're on a ladder and it's long weekend in downtown Vancouver on the busiest street, drunk hooligans everywhere. And I'm just covered in blood and I'm just walking like, so the shoot was, you know, it took a team, but once the creative juices were flowing, we were collaborating on this
All right.
essentially a short movie.
Yeah. Wasn't a 911 called at one point when they saw the crap being beat out of you?
That was the one downside of not having a permit, is also being a little bit sneaky and not notifying you know, the neighborhood that there's going to be a pretty violent beatdown. Yeah, I meet my doppelganger in the video.
Right.
And the first time we tried to shoot it, it was, yeah, stopped by the police. The VPD came in with like their hands on guns. Like
Yeah.
our poor extra body double who had the fake brass knuckles was like pummeling me. Someone called 911 thinking it was a real fight. And they came in screaming, you know, put the fucking gun down, you know, or put the weapon down. And I'm like lying on the ground. No, we're faking it. We're all acting. And the sergeant came by and there was like a big thing and they shut us down. I mean, they were nice about it, but the sergeant was not too happy that we had, you know, we were playing pretend on a busy long weekend when there's actually people getting into knife fights. And so, you know, fair enough. So it shut us down. I was pretty choked. We had to like reshoot that scene and fortunately we were able to get it done. Yeah, we found a way to get it done. Not in public space.
There you go.
In a parking lot.
You learned your lesson.
The VPD is watching.
Now, I've been reading some of the reviews of the album in general since it's been out, and one thing that I enjoy about it, and it seems to have been noted, you can listen to this on many different levels. You can just have it on, and it sounds like a great record. You know, there's the horns and the strings and the funky bass and all that, and it sounds great. Or you can get into it as much as you want to because there's a lot to get into, the whole existential stuff and the literary things and whatever you want to and the lyrics and the thing. Is that kind of what you had in mind when you were first conceiving the record?
You know, sometimes swimming pools have that slanted slope.
Yes.
And you can't dive in the shallow area, but you can kind of float around and enjoy a margarita.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of a Club Med experience, you know, Cancun, all you can eat, all you can drink. But if you don't want to drink and float around in a pool, you can actually swim laps in the deeper end. Sure. I mean, I think that I wanted to say something that wasn't just this vapid, like, I didn't want to make another party record. I don't want to repeat myself. And this is like my 5th full-length album.
Yeah.
And I was 38, 39 when I started writing it. I'm just turned 41 this year now. So it's like, I feel like it's incumbent upon me to scratch a little bit below the surface and, you know, mean what I say and tell the truth and find my truth. And I feel like but I also love really mindless, happy, dumb pop songs. And I love, you know, sometimes you just want to scream sing in your favorite song in a car with your friends.
Right.
So it's those two worlds, those two paradigms. I love both experiences. And my goal is to try and, you know, be as real and put out my best stuff every time I release an album. And yeah, with this record, it wasn't the conscious choice to do something like hyper creative and meaningful, but also make sense and be accessible. That teeter-totter, I'm always going to try and balance on.
Right. I mean, so there's a lot of work involved in making this thing, a lot of musicians, I'm assuming a lot of money because you got to pay people to do stuff. And the record business or music business as it isn't really conducive to making all that back. So does that affect you? And is that in the back of your mind? It's like, why am I doing this? How am I going to survive? What, you know, is it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm clearly not writing for the algorithm. For these
Right.
songs would be 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And they would be recorded on my laptop, and I'd be a bedroom, you know, Spotify
And you'd be all over
rhythmic.
TikTok.
I'd be all over TikTok. Yeah, I don't know. How does an old geezer like me
Oh my God.
continue to make records, and I still feel like there's maybe 10% of the fan base knows I exist. Like I'm still a very obscure artist,
Yeah.
frustratingly. And there's a lot of gatekeeping in this industry. All it takes is for like one national media outlet to like champion an artist, and suddenly everybody's like, well, we're going to cover you now. And then, that can sort of accelerate fans that might like your music finding you. But I don't know. It's a tough, there's tens of dollars to be made in this industry. What
There
can
you
I
go.
say? But you
Yes.
don't really do it for the money, but you've got also like, if you want to survive and do it full time, then you've got to be at least accessible or commercial to someone, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. And I mean, I'm always writing, so if not this one, there'll be another album again someday.
That was leading me to my next question. Are you thinking in terms of what you're going to do next by this time? Because this is
Yeah, I
probably
mean,
old hat to you.
Yeah, this album literally sat for a year
Hmm.
on the shelf, so I'm had a lot of time to think about my next move. But it's important to let things gestate. The creative process there's a lot of time wasting in the
Yeah.
creative process.
Sure.
It's not time efficient. There's a lot of sitting and reading and pulling your antenna high above your head so you can you're ready to receive a signal.
Yep.
But now I've definitely gone, there's some downtime between potential tours and now. So aside from talking to people like yourself and promoting the album via RIT and YouTube, I'm deep into the creative sauce, stirring the pot on what's to become the follow-up.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.